Wendy's career. Moreover, that were made in front of Wendy Williams. If true, that is outrageous because this judge, one, she's not in the entertainment industry, so I don't know where she would get off opining about that and why that's even relevant to her role as a judge, who's basically the judge of the law. And in this case,
For years, Wendy Williams kept sounding the alarm about Clive Davis, and almost nobody wanted to take those warnings seriously. She didn't hide behind vague comments on her show either. She confronted him directly and questioned why his pre-Grammy celebration continued while Whitney Houston's body was still inside the hotel. Then she pushed even further by asking why more wasn't done to help Whitney during her darkest struggles. Those were the uncomfortable questions that so many reporters seemed unwilling to ask. Because of that, Wendy Williams, one of the biggest and most influential talk show hosts ever, a woman who built her reputation on saying exactly what everyone else was afraid to say, eventually found herself under a guardianship. Her television show disappeared, her public voice faded away, her independence was stripped from her. Meanwhile, the same man she openly criticized continued attending Grammy events and receiving lifetime honors until his death at the age of 94. And now that Clive Davis is gone, many people believe the claims Wendy Williams tried to bring into the spotlight deserve another serious look.
Show you how far the homosexual movement within hip hop and sports still needs to go.
This is where my perspective comes in. The entertainment industry doesn't just push critics aside. It often reshapes the story until the person raising uncomfortable questions becomes the problem. Time and time again, the people speaking the loudest, the ones who don't package their message perfectly or have a polished PR machine behind them, end up being labeled as unstable instead of being taken seriously. That's exactly what many people believe happened to Wendy Williams. In their view, she wasn't losing touch with reality, she was exposing things others refused to discuss. Supporters point out that she spoke about allegations involving Diddy years before the federal investigation became public. They also argue she repeatedly highlighted troubling patterns of exploitation throughout the music business. And Clive Davis was another powerful figure she openly challenged. Now that Clive Davis has passed away, many are revisiting Wendy's old comments with fresh eyes. To them, those moments weren't just celebrity gossip, they were warnings about an industry that, in their opinion, protected powerful people while discrediting those who challenged them. So let's break down what Wendy Williams actually did, because the image built around her, that she was simply messy, reckless, and obsessed with gossip, has shaped how many people interpret her legacy. Some believe that reputation made it easier for audiences to overlook the larger questions she was trying to raise. Back in 2003, Wendy welcomed Whitney Houston onto her radio show for what became one of the most unforgettable interviews in entertainment. Whitney was emotional, she was guarded, she was clearly frustrated. Wendy pressed her on her personal struggles, the substance abuse rumors, and the growing concerns surrounding her behavior. At the time, countless critics accused Wendy of going too far. Many insisted she had crossed the line and was publicly humiliating Whitney. But Wendy later explained that her intentions were very different. She said she was trying to warn Whitney before it was too late. She believed the best way to do that was publicly, in front of millions of listeners, because she felt the real danger wasn't only Whitney herself, it was also the people and the system surrounding her. Wendy argued that powerful industry figures continued sending Whitney on demanding international tours while she was still struggling, signed enormous deals she was in no condition to fulfill, and positioned themselves to benefit from her music catalog long after she was gone. In Wendy's view, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. After spending decades covering the entertainment business, she believed she had seen this pattern repeat itself with other artists. She felt she understood what often happened when major stars stopped being viewed as assets and started becoming liabilities. That's why she kept trying to reach Whitney. While much of the public heard a harsh interviewer, Wendy believed she was sounding an urgent alarm that too many people chose to dismiss.
You know what? If you don't say it, Nikki, nobody will. I think that you're doing a wonderful job on American Idol this season. By the way, doesn't this dress look heavy and like something that Kim Kardashian would be wearing now that she's pregnant? Anyway, some critics say that Nikki focuses too much on...
Fast forward to February 11th, 2012, Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a bathtub inside the Beverly Hilton Hotel at just 48 years old. Her death was officially ruled an accidental drowning, with heart disease and drug use listed as contributing factors. At the very same time, 4 floors below, Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy Gala was preparing to begin. After learning the tragic news, Clive made a decision that would become one of the most debated moments of his career. He didn't cancel the event, he didn't ask guests to leave, he didn't even hit pause. Instead, the evening continued as a tribute to Whitney while her body was still upstairs in the hotel. Emergency responders had already been working in the building. Paramedics had done everything they could to save her. Yet the celebration organized by the man who had guided her career for nearly 3 decades continued. Wendy Williams later confronted that decision head-on. She invited Clive onto her show and asked the question almost no one else seemed willing to ask: why was the party allowed to continue? Clive responded that canceling the event never crossed his mind. He said it wasn't something he ever seriously considered. According to him, Whitney's family didn't want the gala canceled. He also claimed Whitney herself would have wanted the celebration to go on. But Wendy wasn't satisfied with that explanation. She kept pressing him for answers. She shifted the conversation toward why stronger efforts weren't made to help Whitney before her death. Wendy questioned whether anyone had considered limiting the financial support that enabled destructive behavior. She asked about interventions and other attempts to protect Whitney while she was still alive. They were the kind of difficult questions investigative journalists often ask, not the comfortable conversations powerful executives are usually given. Even a music industry figure who had survived decades of controversies, lawsuits, and career battles found himself facing someone who refused to back down. By many accounts, he was clearly uncomfortable with the exchange. Wendy has since claimed that Clive took those questions personally. She has alleged that he later used his influence to damage her reputation behind the scenes. According to Wendy, efforts were made over the years to discredit her publicly. Later, as she faced serious health problems and growing concerns about her ability to manage her affairs, a court placed her under a guardianship. In a remarkably short period, her television career came to an end. Her financial accounts were restricted. Her opportunities to speak publicly became far more limited. To many of her supporters, the woman who asked some of the industry's toughest questions had effectively been silenced. And this is where the story becomes even bigger than Whitney Houston alone. Wendy believed she was connecting dots that much of the entertainment media either overlooked or chose not to explore. Whether you agree with her conclusions or not, those connections are exactly why this story continues to spark so much debate today.
He was with me, begging forgiveness, telling me to take a moment, and he would see it, and we were meant to be together.
The first name often brought into this discussion is Janis Joplin. Clive Davis signed her to Columbia Records in 1967 after seeing her breakthrough performance at the Monterey Pop Festival. She quickly became one of the defining music stars of her era. At the same time, she battled well-documented substance abuse issues. Reports have also noted that she and Clive disagreed over the direction of her career. She was found unresponsive in a motel room in 1970 at just 27 years old. Her death was officially ruled accidental. After her passing, her album Pearl was released and became a massive commercial success, generating millions in sales and cementing her legacy. The second name frequently mentioned is Phyllis Hyman, who signed with Arista Records during the late 1970s. She possessed an extraordinary voice and enormous potential, but she later spoke publicly about conflicts with Clive. In one radio interview, she claimed she felt intimidated and mistreated by him. Reports also stated that she owed the label more than $400,000. According to those accounts, she was promised a fresh start before ultimately being dropped by the label that same day. She was later found unresponsive in her New York apartment in 1995. Questions surrounding the circumstances continued to generate discussion. It was also reported that she had been preparing for an appearance at the Apollo Theater before her death. The third name is Whitney Houston, whose story we've already discussed. She spent nearly 3 decades working under Clive's guidance while facing highly public struggles with substance abuse. Reports also described enormous recording contracts that placed tremendous financial pressure on her career. Some claims further suggested she was considering leaving the label after discovering alleged financial discrepancies. She was found unresponsive in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel while Clive Davis's pre-Grammy event continued elsewhere in the building. Following her death, the value of her music catalog grew dramatically, becoming even more commercially successful than it had been during her lifetime.
Swears to God that he loves my niece, but yet you drag her up the steps, you pull her by her hair. You pull her by her hair and you punch her in the face and you knock 2 of her teeth out of her.
The fourth name often included in these discussions is Bobby Christina Brown. She inherited part of Whitney Houston's estate and was found unresponsive in a bathtub in 2015, nearly 3 years after her mother's death, in circumstances many people described as strikingly similar. Her boyfriend, Nick Gordon, was accused in a civil lawsuit of providing her with drugs and placing her in the bathtub. He was later found liable in a wrongful death case in order to pay $36 million in damages. Years later, Gordon himself died from a drug overdose. Pat Houston, Whitney's sister-in-law and the executor of the estate, was also the subject of accusations made by Bobby Brown's sister, who claimed financial concerns influenced decisions surrounding Bobby Christina's medical care. Bobby Christina was only 22 years old. The fifth connection frequently mentioned involves Clive Davis and Diddy. Clive helped finance Bad Boy Records with a reported $15 million investment and remained connected to Diddy professionally for many years. Suge Knight has publicly claimed the two shared a close personal relationship, while Jaguar Wright has made additional allegations about Clive's influence over Diddy's career. In the weeks before Clive's passing, unverified reports claimed he was deeply troubled by memories connected to that relationship. One unnamed source even alleged that the Whitney Houston controversy would seem minor compared to other stories that had yet to surface. The sixth name brought into these conversations is TLC. The group was signed to LawFace Records, an Arista-affiliated label, and despite generating tens of millions of dollars, reports claimed each member received only around $50,000. Frustrated by the financial situation, the trio reportedly traveled to New York to confront Clive Davis directly and refused to leave until they received answers. Lisa Left Eye Lopes, who was widely viewed as the most outspoken member regarding the group's finances, died in a car crash in Honduras in 2002, with authorities ruling the incident an accident. Tian Tebows Watkins and Rosanda Chili Thomas are still alive today, while Left Eye, the member most associated with challenging the business side of the industry, is not. The seventh name often added to these theories is Angie Stone. According to claims made by Jaguar Wright, Angie intended to speak publicly about alleged financial exploitation and wanted to recover money she believed she was owed. Angie Stone died in a car crash in 2025. Additional online claims allege the truck driver involved disappeared after the incident, fueling further speculation, although those claims remain unverified. Supporters of these theories argue the unanswered questions deserve closer examination, while critics caution that coincidence and speculation should not be treated as established fact.
Clive had a fight 2 days before. And from what I was told, Bobby Christina was present for some of that fight.
From this perspective, these events are not being presented as isolated tragedies. They're being framed as connected pieces of a much larger story. The argument is that when those pieces are placed side by side, they appear to form a pattern. According to that view, the pattern stretches across more than 6 decades of music industry history. It touches the careers of numerous artists whose names continue to come up in these discussions. And supporters of this theory believe those connections repeatedly point back to the same influential figure. Their argument isn't necessarily that he was physically involved in every tragedy, but that he helped shape the business system surrounding many of them. They claim he approved the contract that left artists buried in debt. They argue he had enormous influence over which performers received opportunities and which ones were left behind. They believe he controlled major financial decisions. They also say he held significant power over access and industry relationships. In their view, he had the ability to influence the public narrative as well. And according to critics of that system, anyone who challenged that power, questioned financial arrangements, tried to leave, or demanded answers, often found themselves facing serious consequences. They argue that once someone became viewed as a problem inside the industry, their career could quickly unravel. Now, it's equally important to acknowledge what people on the other side of this debate will say. They argue that Wendy Williams should not be treated as a completely reliable source. They point to her documented health issues. They also reference moments where they believe she made inconsistent or controversial public statements. Supporters of the guardianship maintain it was established for her protection based on legal and medical concerns. They also describe Clive Davis as a legendary executive who discovered iconic talent and helped launch countless successful careers. Finally, they argue that linking these separate events together relies on speculation rather than verified evidence, and that extraordinary claims require strong proof before they should be accepted.
Very special connection with artists, with music. I certainly know I had it with.
Here's how I look at it. Supporters of Wendy Williams argue that her health challenges do not automatically mean everything she said was false. To them, those struggles reflect the reality of someone dealing with serious personal difficulties, not proof that she fabricated her claims. They also question why so much attention shifted toward her health and legal situation, while the powerful people she criticized continued receiving public recognition and industry honors. From their perspective, that doesn't settle the questions she raised. It simply changes the focus of the conversation. They believe the spotlight moved away from her allegations and onto her personal life. In their view, once the public began debating Wendy herself, far fewer people were examining whether any of her claims had factual support. The argument is that attention shifted from the message to the messenger. They say the conversation became centered on her health instead of the issues she wanted people to discuss. A second point frequently raised is whether the circumstances surrounding Wendy Williams' guardianship deserve continued public scrutiny. Supporters note that she built a multi-million-dollar career, hosted a successful talk show for many years, wrote best-selling books, and established herself as one of television's most recognizable personalities. They question how someone with that history ultimately came to be placed under a guardianship after years of professional success. Some also point out that this happened after she publicly challenged one of the music industry's most influential executives and asked difficult questions about Whitney Houston's death. That observation has fueled additional speculation online. At the same time, it's important to distinguish speculation from evidence. There is no verified proof that Clive Davis was involved in the legal decisions surrounding Wendy's guardianship. What many observers argue instead is that the sequence of events raises questions they believe are worth discussing. More broadly, they contend that any system capable of removing a person's legal independence should be open to careful public examination, particularly when the case involves a high-profile public figure and continues to generate widespread debate.
She was in denial on that occasion, and she said it's not as serious as you make out.
Another point that continues to fuel debate is Wendy Williams' ongoing guardianship. For years, Wendy has publicly said she wants her independence restored, appearing in multiple interviews where, regardless of how she looked physically, her message remained consistent. She does not believe she needs a guardian and wants control of her own life again. Members of her family have voiced support, fans have organized campaigns, and documentaries have explored her situation. Yet, despite all of that attention, the guardianship has remained in place. Supporters argue that the same television host who publicly questioned Clive Davis about continuing his pre-Grammy event after Whitney Houston's death has also said she cannot freely access her finances, make certain personal decisions, or fully control her public communications without legal oversight. Critics of the guardianship view that as an excessive restriction, while others maintain it exists to protect her based on medical and legal findings. The timing of these events has led to continued public speculation, although no evidence has established a connection between her guardianship and the individuals she criticized. Another major point of disagreement involves the phrase conspiracy theory. Some argue that examining patterns and asking difficult questions should not automatically be dismissed, while others caution that identifying similarities is not the same as proving causation. That's an important distinction to keep in mind throughout this discussion. It is true that Clive Davis worked with several artists, including Janis Joplin, Phyllis Hyman, and Whitney Houston, whose music catalogs continued generating significant revenue after their deaths. It is also true that posthumous releases have long been a major part of the music industry's business model. However, the existence of financial benefit alone does not establish responsibility for a person's death, and no credible evidence has proven that Clive Davis caused or orchestrated those tragedies. That difference is essential when separating documented facts from speculation. The conversation then shifts to Pat Houston, another figure Wendy Williams questioned publicly years ago. Pat became the executor of Whitney Houston's estate and later oversaw major business decisions involving Whitney's music, image, and intellectual property, including the sale of publishing assets and approval of new projects.
Those decisions received both praise and criticism from different groups of fans, and members of Bobby Brown's family also made public accusations regarding her handling of the estate, allegations that remain disputed. Pat was present at the Beverly Hilton on the night Whitney Houston died, and Wendy believed aspects of that evening deserved closer examination. Whether those questions ultimately change anyone's conclusions is up to the evidence, but they remain part of the larger public debate surrounding Whitney's legacy.
I was spoke to her, and she's always wanted me to spend her.
Here's the broader argument that many critics of the music industry are making. They believe Clive Davis helped build a system that transformed exceptionally talented artists, many of them young, black, and from modest backgrounds, into highly profitable commercial brands. Those artists generated enormous wealth for record companies and executives throughout their careers. Critics argue that when addiction, mental health struggles, or disputes over compensation began affecting those artists, the system often failed to provide meaningful support. Instead, they say many performers became trapped by restrictive contracts, relentless touring schedules, and public narratives that placed the blame almost entirely on them. They also argue that managers, attorneys, business partners, and even some family members sometimes benefited financially from keeping that system operating. According to this viewpoint, once an artist's career collapsed or their life ended, the business often continued profiting through insurance payouts, music catalogs, publishing rights, tribute projects, documentaries, and posthumous releases. Supporters of this criticism believe that model remained in place for decades. They argue it helped turn Clive Davis into one of the industry's most influential executives. They also contend it created enormous wealth for major labels and many of the business figures connected to them. Finally, they claim that people who challenged aspects of that system, including Wendy Williams, Jaguar Wright, members of Bobby Brown's family, and a small number of journalists asking difficult questions, often found themselves dismissed, criticized, or marginalized. At the same time, it's important to separate criticism of industry practices from allegations against specific individuals, since broad concerns about how the music business has treated artists over the years do not by themselves establish personal wrongdoing without supporting evidence.
Is he this gangster that behind the scenes is that him? Or is that
Shout out to Wendy Williams.
Supporters of Wendy Williams often argue that she wasn't pushed aside because she was mistaken. They believe it was because she raised questions that challenged powerful people. In their view, she identified troubling patterns within the entertainment business long before many of those conversations reached the mainstream. They believe her criticisms of the industry's culture, including her comments about Clive Davis, deserve to be revisited rather than dismissed. Now that Clive Davis has passed away, many of Wendy's supporters say her voice, restricted for years while she remained under a court-ordered guardianship, should once again be part of the public conversation. They argue her statements should be examined as claims worthy of discussion, not simply written off as celebrity gossip. From their perspective, the names that keep appearing in these debates, Janis Joplin, Phyllis Hyman, Whitney Houston, Bobby Christina Brown, the business relationship with Diddy, the decision to continue the pre-Grammy Gala after Whitney's death, and Wendy's later guardianship, represent pieces of a much larger narrative they believe deserves closer scrutiny. Others strongly disagree, arguing that these events should not be treated as evidence of a single coordinated pattern without verifiable proof. Ultimately, much depends on how a person interprets the available facts. Some see coincidence, while others see unanswered questions that continue to fuel public debate. What can be said with certainty is that Clive Davis had an extraordinary influence on the music industry for more than 6 decades, and that influence remains the subject of both admiration and criticism. Although Clive Davis is no longer alive, the debates surrounding his legacy have not disappeared. The people who raised concerns about the music industry are still speaking, and many of those conversations continue today. So I'll leave you with 2 questions. Do you believe Wendy Williams' claims deserve a fresh, evidence-based examination, or do you think the public has already reached the right conclusion? And as more people continue sharing their experiences in the entertainment industry, what kind of evidence do you think is necessary before serious allegations should be accepted as fact?